The small town of Brooksville had always been quiet, nestled between thick forests and rolling hills. But that peace was shattered one crisp autumn evening when little Emily Green disappeared. She was only 9 years old, and she had always been drawn to the woods that bordered the town, where the trees stood like silent sentinels. That evening, she wandered farther into the forest than ever before. Her mother, Mary, called for her as the sun dipped below the horizon, but there was no answer. When the news spread that Emily was missing, the entire town mobilized. People from every corner of Brooksville gathered, their flashlights slicing through the gathering darkness, their voices calling her name. Days passed, but there was no sign of the young girl. Search parties scoured the forest from dawn until dusk, but the woods remained silent, as though the earth itself had swallowed her up. As the town's hope began to wane, Emily's parents, Mary and Thomas, could hardly bear the weight of their grief. The once vibrant girl, now gone without a trace. They couldn't help but feel the pull of the forest, an unsettling sensation in the pit of their stomachs, as if the trees were watching, whispering. Then, on the 5th day of the search, something changed. The police had just finished combing through the dense woods once again, when a local hunter, a man named John, reported something strange. He claimed to have heard a child's laughter deep within the forest, coming from a cave that no one had noticed before, hidden behind a veil of overgrown ivy. Without a word, Mary and Thomas followed John, their hearts pounding in their chests, desperate to see their daughter again. The air grew colder as they approached the cave's mouth, the trees eerily still, as though the forest itself held its breath. Inside the cave, they saw her. Emily sat in the dim light, alone in the dark, on the cold stone floor. Her small hands rested in her lap, her legs crossed beneath her. She was smiling, but it wasn't the smile of a child who had been lost for days. No, it was something far darker, a smile too wide, too knowing. Her face was pale, almost lifeless, and her once bright eyes, now, they were completely white. There was no trace of the familiar, sparkling blue that had once shone with innocence. They were empty, like pools of nothing. "Emily," her mother whispered, voice trembling as she stepped forward, reaching out for her daughter. The smile on Emily's face grew wider, and for a moment, it seemed to stretch unnaturally, as if it could tear her face apart. She tilted her head, her empty white eyes never leaving her parents. "I'm so happy to be home," Emily said, her voice soft but hollow. It was her voice, no doubt about that, but it was wrong. It felt as if the words weren't truly hers. Thomas froze, his heart in his throat. "Emily, what happened? Where have you been? We've been looking for you for so long." Emily's smile faltered for a moment, and then she giggled softly, an unsettling, echoing sound that bounced off the cave walls. "They don't want me to leave," she said, her voice almost a whisper, as though she was speaking to someone else. "The trees, they like me here. They want me to stay forever." Her parents' blood ran cold. The air seemed to grow colder still, a sense of dread seeping from the very earth beneath them. The shadows in the cave lengthened, twisting, as though they were alive, writhing in the corners of the space. Without warning, Emily stood up, her movements jerky, as though she was being guided by some unseen force. She reached out with one pale hand and touched her mother's cheek. "You can stay too if you want. she whispered, the words almost a hum. The forest is so nice. The trees, they're so kind. They never let me go. Mary stumbled back, panic rising. No, Emily, you're coming home. We're leaving now. But Emily shook her head, her white eyes blank and vacant. I can't leave them. They're my friends now, and they'll never let me go. As the words left her lips, the cave seemed to tremble. The ground beneath them rumbled softly, and the air grew thick with a suffocating presence. The dark shadows pressed closer, like cold fingers brushing against the backs of their necks. Suddenly, Emily let out a high-pitched, eerie laugh. It sounded too much like a cry of joy, and yet it was filled with something far more sinister. The forest seemed to answer, its deep hum vibrating through the walls of the cave. Emily, please, Thomas begged, his voice breaking. But Emily just smiled again, her eyes unblinking and empty. We're not leaving, Daddy. We're all staying. At that moment, the forest roared with life, and the ground beneath them shook violently. Mary and Thomas didn't have time to react. The shadows lunged forward, swallowing their daughter whole. The last thing they heard was Emily's laughter, echoing into the darkness. When the townspeople came the next day to search the cave, they found it empty. No sign of Emily. No trace of her parents. The cave remained undisturbed, the ivy crawling back into place, as if nothing had ever happened. And deep within the woods, if you listened closely enough, you could hear the laughter of a child. A giggle. Soft at first, then louder, and louder still. And if you ventured too close, just close enough to the trees, you might see a pale face peering from between the branches, smiling with eyes as white as the moon. Waiting. Always waiting.